You've probably seen those viral survival videos claiming straw is the ultimate winter insulator, better than anything modern technology can offer. They'll tell you World War II soldiers survived brutal winters because of straw, and that you should stockpile bales for the apocalypse. But here's what nobody's telling you about straw insulation, and why getting this wrong in a real emergency could be the difference between comfort and hypothermia. I spent months digging through actual military records, field reports, and survival manuals from World War II, and what I found contradicts almost everything you've heard about straw as an insulator. Yes, soldiers used it, but not in the way modern survival guides suggest, and definitely not as a replacement for proper gear. The truth is far more nuanced, and understanding these nuances could save your life. Let's start with the biggest misconception floating around the preparedness community. People claim straw outperformed wool blankets and military-issued gear during World War II. That's not actually what happened. What the field reports show is that soldiers used straw as a supplement when their primary insulation failed due to moisture, or when they simply didn't have enough gear to begin with. The Eastern Front reports are particularly clear on this point. Russian winters didn't just freeze equipment, they created conditions where moisture management became the primary survival challenge. Wool blankets became death traps not because wool is inferior to straw, but because soldiers couldn't keep them dry. When you're in a foxhole for days, when you're sweating during combat and then cooling down rapidly, when snow is constantly melting and refreezing on your body, even the best materials fail without proper layering systems. Here's where it gets interesting. Straw worked in those specific contexts because it addressed one critical problem that modern survivalists completely overlook. It wasn't about warmth, it was about ground insulation and moisture barriers. Soldiers lying directly on frozen earth were losing massive amounts of body heat through conduction. The ground acts like a heat sink, constantly pulling warmth away from your body, regardless of how many blankets you pile on top. Straw created distance from that thermal drain, but, and this is crucial, it only worked when soldiers understood the complete system. They weren't just throwing down some straw and calling it a night. They were using straw as a foundation, then layering wool or whatever dry fabric they had on top of themselves. And, crucially, they were in enclosed spaces like barns, bunkers, or ruins that blocked wind. The viral survival content gets dangerous when it suggests you can stuff straw into your clothing for insulation. Yes, soldiers did this, but context matters enormously. They were doing it as an absolute last resort, and they understood the trade-offs. Stuffing straw into your coat dramatically reduces mobility. In combat situations, that could get you killed. It also creates a fire hazard if you're anywhere near flames or even sparks. More importantly, straw absorbs moisture from your body throughout the day. If you can't replace it regularly, which most soldiers couldn't, you're essentially wrapping yourself in damp organic material that will freeze overnight. The soldiers who survived using these methods were the ones who understood they needed to change out the straw constantly, and who recognized this was a compromise, not an optimal solution. Let's talk about what modern preppers should actually understand about straw. First, the type of straw matters immensely, and most survival guides never mention this. Wheat straw, oat straw, barley straw, they all have different properties. Some compress more easily, some hold moisture differently, some break down faster when handled. World War II soldiers weren't choosing their straw. They were grabbing whatever was available in abandoned farms. You, however, have the luxury of selection if you're actually preparing. Second, straw has a shelf life that nobody discusses. It degrades, it attracts rodents, it can develop mold in storage.
Those beautiful golden bales you see in autumn are not the same bales 6 months later, after they've been through temperature cycling and humidity changes. If you're storing straw for emergency insulation, you need rotation systems that most preparedness advice completely ignores. The real lesson from World War II isn't that straw is some magical forgotten insulator. The lesson is that soldiers survived because they understood principles, not because they had specific materials. They knew that trapped air creates insulation, regardless of whether it's trapped by straw, wool, or synthetic fibers. They knew that staying dry was more important than staying warm, because wet insulation is worse than no insulation. They knew that ground insulation mattered more than most people realized, and they knew how to adapt whatever materials they found to serve multiple purposes. Here's what you should actually do with this information. If you're building a legitimate preparedness strategy, straw can play a role, but not the role that viral videos suggest. It's excellent for creating thermal mass in shelter walls if you're building something semi-permanent. Mixed with clay or mud, it creates structures that moderate temperature swings. It's fantastic as ground insulation in fixed locations where you can pile it thick and replace it as needed. But as body insulation, as emergency clothing stuffing, as a replacement for modern sleeping systems, it's a last resort option that requires knowledge most people don't have.
The irony is that modern materials have solved almost every problem that made straw necessary in World War II. Closed-cell foam sleeping pads are lighter, more compact, more durable, and more effective at ground insulation than straw ever was. Modern synthetic insulations maintain loft even when damp in ways that neither straw nor wool can match. If you're genuinely preparing for emergencies, your money is better spent on understanding layering systems, moisture management, and how to maintain modern gear than on romanticizing agricultural byproducts. But here's where the historical knowledge becomes genuinely valuable. Understanding why soldiers turned to straw teaches you to think about insulation functionally rather than materially. It's not about having the right stuff. It's about understanding what insulation actually does and recognizing opportunities in your environment. That mindset, that ability to see a pile of leaves or dry grass or even crumpled newspaper as a potential thermal barrier, that's the real survival skill. World War II soldiers weren't using straw because it was superior. They were using it because they understood principles well enough to make anything work. So before you fill your garage with straw bales based on a viral video, ask yourself whether you're preparing based on principles or based on romantic ideas about historical toughness. The soldiers who survived those brutal winters would tell you to invest in proper gear first, learn the principles of thermal regulation second, and only then consider improvised materials as backup options. That's the real lesson, and it's one that could actually keep you alive when conditions turn harsh. If this breakdown of what World War II actually teaches us about survival changed how you think about preparedness, hit subscribe for more reality checks on popular survival myths, and drop a comment telling me what other survival advice you want examined with this level of scrutiny.